Back in the Old Testimony church, they used to say, if we ever needed the Lord, we sure do need him now. But I want to take a riff from that and mix it or remix it, as the young folks say, and say, if we ever needed the vote, we sure do need the vote now. Because where we are in history. Here we are right here in this church today, 399 years since the first ship landed in Virginia bringing slaves. Here we are 248 years after Crispus Attucks was the first American who happened to be an African American to die fighting in the Revolutionary War. Today we're here 242 years since the signing of the Declaration and 231 years since the Constitution was adopted, but in that Constitution we were considered 3/5 of a person. Here we are 169 years since Harriet Tubman escaped slavery. Here we are 166 years since Frederick Douglass said one July 4th that America's July 4th celebrations were fraud, bombast, hypocrisy, until America did right by the sons and daughters of slaves. Here we are 150 some years after the Dred Scott decision, when a Supreme Court justice who was rushed onto the Supreme Court, pushed through the confirmation process, read the opinion and said that a black man had no rights for which a white man had to obey. But we're also here 161 years ago when 3 months after that decision, Frederick Douglass stood up and said, the very attempt to blot out forever the hopes of an enslaved people may be the necessary link in the chain of events preparatory to the downfall and complete overthrow of the whole slave system. He said the whole history of the anti-slavery movement is studied with proof that all measures devised and executed with a view to ally and diminish the anti-slavery agitation have only served to increase, intensify, and embolden that agitation. Frederick Douglass said this decision means it's not time for us to sit down, but time for us to stand up and intensify. Here we are 155 years since the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, 153 years since the end of the Civil War, 148 years since the ratification of the 15th Amendment with the right to vote, 74 years since the Smith versus Allwright case opened up primaries for black people, 74 years since Primus King was denied the right to vote in Georgia in a primary, 64 years since Brown versus Board of Education, 63 years since the brutal murder of Emmett Till, 58 years since the sit-in in Greensboro, 54 years since Fannie Lou Hamer said sometime there comes a time when you got to get sick and tired of being sick and tired. 57 years since Dr. King told the union movement that the only voting bloc that could transform America would be for blacks and whites and labor and Latinos to get together and fight for what is right. 55 years since the murder of Mega, 55 years since the March on Washington, 55 years since the bombing of 4 beautiful black girls in a Birmingham church, 54 years since the signing of the Civil Rights Act, 54 years since Swanner, Cheney, and Goodman were killed, 53 years since Bloody Sunday, 53 years since the Voting Rights Act, 53 years since Malcolm X was killed, 50 years since the assassination of Dr. King, 49 years since conservatives dismantled the office of economic opportunity, 49 years since my parents fought to integrate public schools, and 10 years since Barack Obama, no matter what they called him, still had to be called Mr. President. Now I'm here to tell you, we've been through too much. We've gone through too much to sit down now. I was at a Jewish service and I spoke with some of the rabbis, and the rabbis said, Reverend Barber, that whenever in the Bible you hear and God's voice or the prophet's voice, the word is koil, K-O-L, and the same word in Hebrew for voice is the same word for vote. In fact, in one place, the word koil literally means to thunder, to let your voice thunder. All I need for you to do is show up and vote for voting rights. Show up and vote for living wages. Show up and vote for public education. Show up and vote for health care. Let your voice
ship.